Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Financial Transformation Live. My name is Hannah Monroe, and I'm here to talk to you today about building a future-proofed reporting architecture. So this session actually came out of a previous one, but I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. So come join us. We're going to talk all about how you can not make any mistakes with how you design your reporting architecture. I'm going to give you a quick overview of my recommended process for designing your reporting architecture, and we'll take it from there. So for those of you that haven't been on one of these sessions before, the idea behind them is all about helping you get the most out of your finance systems. So all of the advice that I'm going to give you today is based around, is not specific to Sage, even though we are a Sage specialist. We're going to talk through the components of strong financial data design, common risks and mistakes that people make when going through this process, and how to ensure it's the right financial structure. And of course, please do feel free to jump in with any questions that you might have, and I'll do my very best to get to them during the session. But also, if not, I'll make sure I follow up with them afterwards. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Hannah Monroe, and I'm so proud to announce that we are also Sage's Customer Success Partner of the Year for 2024. We recently received that award, so that is the best thing that's happened to me this month. So I thought I'd share that. But we are basically a financial transformation consultancy that specializes in Sage technology. So we try to tie up both process, data, and Sage technology to help give our finance teams the very best in terms of outputs, and that's actually one of the reasons we won the award, was that the number of case studies and reference sites that we have, as well as having an amazing retention rate. So enough about the awards, and on to today's session. So for those of you that haven't seen our last session, ensuring a successful finance systems implementation project, that is now available on demand and on the podcast. So let's talk through the components of strong finance data design. Now, for those of you that are avid followers of this Financial Transformation Live, you will recognize this slide, because this is the slide that I covered in a previous financial transformation session. And I wanted to bring this back up because just to remind everybody what the recommended process is for how you design your financial data architecture. So the first thing is to get up your reporting requirements. So what do we mean by reporting requirements? So that is going out to all of your stakeholders, both internal and your executive stakeholders, and understanding what it is that they need out of the system. So that's part one. Part two is understanding what capabilities that your technology has, because every system has different capabilities. So one of the things you need to understand is what architecture options and reporting capabilities do you have in order to help you flex and design your reporting structure. So for instance, in Sage Intacct, that could be the dimensions that you have available, the number of fields, etc., the different reporting tools. In Sage 200, that would be the chart of accounts, reporting groups, etc. So you need to understand what and how your system puts reporting together, so that you can design a structure that works for that system. And every system is slightly different, so that's a really important step. 3, you need to understand your data entry processes, because as your data design needs to align with how you process data and make sure that it collects the right data you need for your processes as well as your reports. And 4, you need to think about how you're going to maintain this architecture, because this obviously is something that you don't want to have to do every year to revamp. You're going to lose all of that data history. So you need to think about how you're going to validate, how you're going to maintain it, all those kind of things. So you might be asking, well, if you covered all this in the last session, what are we covering today? So I'm going to talk to you about my top tips for how you future-proof. So I've given you the process, and if you haven't watched that previous session, I would really recommend you do. And then today's session is about, where does this process go wrong? Because some of this may look or feel like basic common sense, and it is, and you'd be amazed at how many people don't even follow this basic process. But actually within that, there is some nuances that you need to consider as you go through this. So let's get started on those then. So when you're thinking about your reporting requirements, so it's really important that you can consult with stakeholders at all levels, because reporting isn't just, and I've talked about reporting types before, but just to refresh everybody's memory, it's not just the management report pack that you produce at the end of the month. That's obviously an important part of it, but you have different types of reports. So you have operational, transactional, and strategic or management reports, but everyone is pulling data, and sometimes reports aren't just used for giving to people, they are also used for processing. So it could be that you pull a list of transactions within a certain period so that you could do your rev rep, for instance. So thinking about all of the different reporting requirements that you have and making sure that you're consulting at all different levels before you change your reporting architecture, because the last thing you want to do is go live with your new reporting architecture and then somebody who's doing a critical process can't get access to the data they need in the format they need it, or that their process is slowed down. So it's really important you consult with stakeholders at all levels. And also when you're consulting with those stakeholders, it's really important that you're trying to think ahead of what you're going to need. So, and again, thinking through, what is it that they're going, what is it they're going to want in not just 12 months, but 18, 3 years? Because if you don't get this data structure right now, in that, in 2 to 3 years, you will not have the history or the level of back data that they will need to be able to make that data and reporting relevant. So that's super important that you do that. Thinking about the key processes that go into the reporting, because very often that will identify things that you aren't aware of. So looking, following through a reporting cycle and seeing how and where data is coming from, how it's being manipulated, what's happening to it as you go into your current reporting. Because again, you'll not only understand the processes, but you might also realize that perhaps data isn't as valid as you may think it is, or it's been coded incorrectly, etc. And really understanding the key structures and aligning to your business model. So what I mean by that is it's not just about the legal entities, right? So obviously management reporting and your statutory reporting is incredibly important. It needs to be there. But building structures that support almost the direction of travel that your business is going into. So if you're looking to go more into subscription as an organization, you're trying to build a subscription model alongside maybe your traditional model, then you need to think about what are the subscription metrics and ways I need to report in order to facilitate that growth. And thinking through how you're going to start collecting that data now, so that when your board comes to you in 2 years' time and says, right, can you give us our MRR, our ARR, our churn, all of those key metrics, that you've actually got the data available to do that? Because otherwise you're going to spend a lot of time in spreadsheets, a lot of time. So understanding the structures and almost understanding making sure you incorporate your business model structure into your reporting design. So how you define your departments or your cost centers or your project, and thinking about how do you want to be able to collect and slice and dice that data. And something I don't think people do enough is reviewing similar organizations or industries to see what they're doing, because every industry tends to have best practices in terms of reporting. So not just your own industry, but almost similar industries, because even if your industry isn't as advanced in its reporting capabilities, you might find something of interest in other organizations. So talking to your peers, sharing that data and thinking that through is really important. And I'm just going to say it again, think big picture, think future, think way ahead of where you need to be, but go down to that level of detail that I talked about. So operational, transactional, and strategic / management reporting requirements, and engaging with those stakeholders and the hardest thing is trying to get them to open up. So, and actually, rather than asking questions like, are you happy with the reporting you have now? Yeah. And say, asking the question. So, when you're analyzing a decision, what kind of information would be important to you? If we decided to evaluate an acquisition, what information would you want from that? It's trying to ask questions in different ways and open up the questioning on on those conversations, running workshops with different types of stakeholders to try and build on that, on the ask that you're being given. Because unfortunately, some people are so focused on what they get now, what they don't always appreciate is the power of what they could get and what that means to the business. And they won't do until they see it, and then they'll come to you with the ask. So it's kind of getting ahead of that ask is the big thing. And one of the big, I think one of the important things is, as CFOs, we're obviously, and senior finance people, we're obviously very in the business. We understand what's going on. We understand the strategy. We're very, and certainly the good CFOs are really into the commercial and the business model, right? But I think what comes with that is, please don't assume you know what's needed, because you might have a really good idea of what's wrong with the existing one, but that doesn't mean you have a really good idea of what you're going to need to put in place, because actually spending the time with those different stakeholders really helps refine it. And stakeholders aren't just your board, they aren't just your executive team, they are your accountants and your auditors, they are your your individual countries. If you're a global organization, specialists in those different countries, they are your financial operations team, they are your sales and marketing team, the leaders in there, because they will all at some point need information from you and will ask for it. So again, you want to think the ask through ahead of time. As you're going through this, think about how, sorts of questions you need to ask them are, what in what ways do we need to restrict access to this report and information? Is there anything you don't want to share with the wider organization, or you don't think should be shared? How do and how you manage that? You need to ask them, how do they want to consume this? So what I mean by that is, do they want it in visual formats? Do they want lots of data, like lots of lists of data? Do they want calculations, etc.? Because again, going back to when I talked through the process, understanding the different reporting tools and capabilities you have, that may change how you and where you build out your reporting requirements. Think about the drillability of what they're asking. So do they need to be able to drill down to a deep level within the different types of reports, understanding the drillability, how it needs to be displayed, how they're going to access it, consume it, etc. The other thing as well is to think about how you're going to slice and dice that data. So when they pull that report, how do they want to filter it? What, do they want date filters? Do they want to be able to filter by department, by cost center? Do they want to be able to filter by customer, for instance, or by individual projects or groups of projects? What's the ask? And very much understand whether these are as-at reports versus live data. So what do I mean by that? So an as-at report is commonly used at the end of, from a financial period. So tell me what my P&L looked like as at the end of the month versus tell me what my P&L looks like. Okay. And that's really important, because so many reporting tools have limits around how they store and work that as-at data. So if you want to see a creditors report at the end as at a particular date, you need to make sure that that's in your requirements. So again, thinking through the requirement elements of each of those is super important. Next is assessing your system's reporting and data structures. Okay, so again, some of the things that, and again, all of this stuff is things that I've kind of gotten in as a consultant and seen the issues. So I'm trying to almost prevent these issues to happen. So try to work within the system's intended structure. I've seen some very clever chart of accounts configurations. The problem is they were so clever that the person that took over that chart of accounts couldn't use it because it was too complicated and too hard to maintain. You needed a degree in data analytics to be able to add a new account in and figure out where to code stuff. So you need, if you just because you can do something and it delivers a reporting result, you need to validate that against the person's ability to maintain and manage that going forwards, and not your ability. A standard person coming in would, if as you expand and grow as a team, you are going to have to delegate more responsibility. Can they take that structure and use it? Okay. And so I use the term fudging because there's normally a way around stuff, and we do pride ourselves here at ITES at finding ways around stuff. But one of the questions we always ask ourselves is this the right thing to do? Should we be doing it in this way? And that is super important. So always try to work within the system's intended structure versus fudging it. When you're feeling actually, this is getting rather complex, I feel like I'm using it outside of its intended use case, you need to ask yourself a number of questions. So the first thing is, do I need to do this? How important is this reporting requirement to do that? And put a number on it, right? And you'll see why in a second. But thinking about whether this is actually a need, is this a nice to have, or is this we must have this, or this business is going to go under requirement? And then once you've understood that requirement, obviously validate to make sure this is the only way you can do it. And if those two answers there, you've got to figure out then what is a time frame that I have in order to I guess take the next step in terms of systems and data structure, right? Because if that reporting, that requirement is so important that you have to fudge and push the boundaries and capabilities of your current system, that at some point you are going to outgrow it. And I can give you some really great examples of how that's happened in a second. But so then you need to say, is this a short-term, a medium, or a long-term piece? If it's a long-term, quite frankly, I don't think you should do it. If it's medium term, then what's your plan? And the same with short term. So how are you going to get off and onto a system that supports this kind of reporting and capability? Because again, there's probably you can push the limits of something for so long, but then it will fall over, either in terms of its capabilities or its robustness again. And that's the last thing you want with reporting, is a lack of robustness and quality. And that's something you need to address. And some examples I've seen of this is where people have created a department for every project, right? And what's happened is it was all right for the first year when they were a small business, but then as they grew and they got to dealing with hundreds or thousands of projects a year, that caused issues with their data structure. And actually their database couldn't handle the volume of data. And it was really hard for people to find and code to that structure, and they couldn't clean it up because they needed all the history. So really thinking this stuff through and think about the term. If you are going to have to do something a bit drastic, then think about the time frame in which it needs to be suitable for, and will it last there? And the sort of things you could think about is, well, what if the volumes grow, the data volumes grow? What does that mean? Is this still the right solution? How long does that data need to be available for? Again, is this the right solution? What happens if the team grow? Can somebody else pick up and pull this reports, etc.? And again, this is the point about future proofing, is that the whole idea behind future proofing is that it's going to last you. Now, your future proofing might need to last me till I move on to my next system, which is going to be an X amounts of months or years. Yeah. And then you can make that judgment call. But then you also need to have almost like the guardrails to say, right, if we hit this amount of, I don't know, projects or this amount of employees, then at that point we need to seriously consider upgrading, because it's going to have a massive impact on how we operate. So the other thing to consider is permissions, right? And I see this a lot, is that people go, oh, I'm going to create a dashboard with pre-built filters for every employee, which is fine if you've got 5 users. Once you get to 20 or 30, maintaining and managing that is really challenging. So really thinking carefully when you're hard coding filters or permissions, because the robustness won't be there and the scalability won't be there. And that's where, we talk, the whole point of this session is about future proofing. So that's again where we see things falling over, is because they've outgrown the structures that they put in place to get reporting or processes out. Another key thing is to think about your input processes. Very often when there's a redesign of data, normally it becomes more complex. Not always. Some people, because their predecessors made some bad decisions, are coming in to simplify, and there's nothing wrong with that. But think about your input process, your processes, and any integrations, and make sure that they align. So if you're simplifying, make sure that the data that you're not recording isn't needed in any of the transactional reports, because that's normally where it's seen. You might not need it in the management stuff, but sometimes you do need it at a transactional level. If you are adding more complexity into your reporting model, then think about how you're going to get that data in. If you've got integrations, does their data structure align with yours? So if you're talking about projects, so they have the concept of a project number, for instance, an expense system. If you've got an expense system that integrates, will that be able to code to your project, for instance? So just thinking through the data structures that sit around your finance system as well as in it, and whether they are aligned and can support, is also very important. And think through, especially when you're increasing the complexity of your reporting model, think through, is there anything I can pre-populate? I'm a big believer in integration to support data, data analysis, because the more that you can automate coming in, the less hands you've got on it, which tends to mean the better the data generally, but also the less time it takes to get that data in. And because as you increase the number of fields that you're asking for people to populate, the amount of data that you're trying to feed and report in on, that again adds a more through linked fields. So when I populate this one, can it auto populate this? For instance, validations, and use integration wherever possible. And then validating. So make sure you do, and I feel like I've said this before, but I'm just going to say, because it's so important, is make sure you work through all of your processes, your data entry processes, to ensure that you can collect the data at the level you need to, and not just collect it, but can you collect it at the right point for it to be entered? So sometimes data isn't available till after the fact for whatever reason. Do you have the ability to go back and retrospectively amend it, or do you need to change your processes in order to maximize the benefit of that data and get that data in? Always validate your structures, your data structures, with your software or technical partner. They will have seen lots of people do this, kind of go through this process before. They will offer advice and guidance, hopefully, on how to do it well. And they may think of things that you haven't thought of. So it could be that there's a known issue with reporting in a particular way, or maybe the database or the infrastructure that you're sitting on won't support that volume of data. Whatever it is, that's their job, right? They are there to advise and support. Make sure that you use that knowledge and capability. Reviewing against existing structures. So once you've designed a new structure, go back and compare to your existing. And it's an exercise a lot of people forget about. And then when they actually go live with it, they find something that they need to use. So thinking through that, and make sure you're reviewing your existing structures as almost like a check and balance. Where is the gap? What am I missing? Do I need to incorporate that? And again, and I did talk about this previously, so thinking through your validations, checks and balances. And what do I mean by that? The formats. How are you going to format your fields? How are you going to enforce formatting? How are you going to populate them, making sure that they do get populated? So how are you going to, are you going to allow people to skip past and not populate a particular field? And how are you going to enforce permissions around either entering data, editing data, and reporting on data? And really think about what's the maintenance that this particular data structure is going to require as it moves forwards. And I put it in the slide, if you have to build 1 billion nominal codes to get your reporting out, it's probably wrong. So you've got either the wrong base system or the wrong data structure too. So you do seriously need to consider that if you do hit that scenario. Okay, so there you go, guys. Those are my top tips. Probably one of the shortest sessions I've done, but again, we covered a huge amount in that previous session on what that process should look like. This was kind of a do's and don'ts around that process. Please do go back and review that initial on how to approach going through assessing your requirements, understanding your data and systems, what questions you should ask. There's a huge amount more depth in that process that is available through that on-demand Financial Transformation Live. And of course, it's on the podcast. Our next session is just in time for your new year, is assessing your current financial systems. So talking through the process of auditing, I guess is the word, but what are the things you need to think about as part of that process? What are some top tips and suggestions for areas for improvement that we commonly see that you can look at? And that's coming out in November, date to be released. We won't be having a December one, guys. So just so you know, so that's November's last one. I am really looking for ideas and suggestions for what we do next. So all of my sessions come off outputs of consultancy where someone's asked me a question or questions that you guys that are listening and consuming this have sent to me. So please do keep that up. If you've got a question or a topic that you would love me to see cover, then please do message me. I'm really looking for ideas because I want this to be something that you guys get a huge amount of value from. Okay, so today's session, financial data and mistakes and how to ensure it's the right financial software. And don't forget, I've done quite a few sessions on data strategy. So I've done building out your financial data strategy. I've done a session on building out your data design, how to design your reporting architecture. Obviously, this session, I've got a Sage database guide. I've got one for 200 now, but I've got one coming for Intacct if anyone is interested and wants that. And then for those of you that are using or thinking about using Sage Intacct, we have the reporting tools overview in Sage Intacct to give you a view of what, just aligning with that capabilities piece, that will give you that insight there. And for our customers, we've also done some great content on reporting in our customer education sessions for Sage 200. So hope that was useful, guys. If you've got feedback, thoughts, questions, then please do pop them in the chat, reach out, and I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, I'll see you next time on the Financial Transformation Live.